Former President Trump and 18 others also have 4 days to surrender at a court in Georgia after being indicted in the state last week.
However, these defendants are not expected to enter their pleas until next month. It's all happening in Fulton County, and the Fulton County District Attorney has ordered those charged in this sweeping indictment to turn themselves in noon local time on Friday. That's the deadline. She's proposing formal arraignments take place, however, the week of September 5th.
The former president and more than a dozen of his associates are facing a total of 41 charges tied to alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election. These include election fraud, racketeering, and more. Joining us now from Atlanta is CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Nikole, great to see you. Can we expect Trump to surrender by Friday, or are his lawyers fighting to push back that deadline?
Well, that is our expectation, that he would turn himself in by the end of this week. We do know that negotiations have been underway between his legal team and the district attorney. And as you mentioned, she has set a pretty hard deadline for all of these defendants to turn themselves in by this Friday at noon. That being said, it's been almost a week, actually exactly a week, since that indictment was unveiled, and we have yet to see any of these defendants surrender as of yet. But obviously, you can probably see around me, we have a number of media cameras lined up across the jail to monitor any potential movements. But certainly, in terms of the former president, it's still our expectation that he will surrender sometime this week.
Nikole, we mentioned that even if a surrender happens this week, the formal arraignments wouldn't happen until the week of September 5th, which, according to my calendar, is a gap. What's going on with that gap?
Well, it's really nothing unusual. That's just simply how the process works down here. It's typically a two-step process. So keep in mind, when the former president and his 18 co-defendants were indicted last week and that indictment was unsealed and made public, none of those defendants had to be present for that. Once an indictment is put forth, of course, then any average defendant then has to be booked, has to be processed, and then a court appearance is set. So that is simply the process that we're working through right now. It's not really unusual, although certainly we have been inquiring as to whether, in the case of the former president, it could potentially be done all in the same time, potentially, so that, for instance, he wouldn't have to make a second trip back here, although with respect to the arraignment process, it's possible that some of those could potentially take place virtually. That being said, we do know that the district attorney has made clear that she would like these arraignments to take place starting the week of the 5th, and she would like a trial to begin March 4th, which is just one day before Super Tuesday. And we have seen some defendants push back against that scheduling, so it's possible others could do so as well, which could potentially affect that calendar.
And Nikole, more than 3/4 of people who responded to a new CBS News poll believe the Georgia indictment is politically motivated. Any other polling or insight into if that could possibly change moving forward?
Yeah, well, we'll have to see as this process plays out. I mean, certainly interesting in terms of doing a deeper dive into the numbers that, many people that were surveyed as part of this poll not only believe that this was politically motivated, you see 77% there, but also many of those who kind of share those views also believe that President Biden wasn't legitimately elected, and they believe that in the case of the former president that he does have a legitimate gripe, if you will. So that is some of the rationale behind those numbers. Some of the people that we also surveyed noted that they feel that the former president is telling them the truth. For instance, when he says the system is rigged against him and that the system is corrupt in terms of the government. So I think from that standpoint, that is why you're kind of seeing some of those polling numbers, particularly that big disparity between the former president and some of his rivals. But that being said, having talked to some individuals who were present for some of these events that are laid out in this indictment, people who witnessed what happened at the time back in 2020, one witness witness in particular told me that, they hope that the more evidence that is put out in this case, whether through the indictment or ultimately through a trial, that they do hope that it changes hearts and minds. And they point to, for instance, the January 6th hearings where we saw all of that televised and a lot of information put out. So I think it remains to be seen. This is going to be a very lengthy and arduous process. Obviously, it's possible people's sentiment could change in either direction as we move through this case.
Yeah, it does seem unlikely, though, Nikole. There was another number from the poll that struck me. I don't know if you saw it as well. It was a question along the lines of who do you trust to give you truthful information about the former president? And people picked the former president over their own friends or religious community leaders.
That's very telling.
So, yeah, bad morning for friends and religious leaders.
All right, Nikole Killion in Atlanta, thank you.
Striking numbers indeed. Yeah.